Tom O'Dwyer, the Head of Dairy Knowledge Transfer at Teagasc Moore Park, joins us now. Tom, can you start off by outlining the importance of drying off?
So the drying off process is a very important process that takes place at the end of a lactation. And it's important for two reasons. Number one, it defines the, the end of the lactation. So it's a stop point. And by putting in place the process, then the farmer allows a couple of things to happen. Number one, he allows the udder to repair itself after the lactation just ending, and allows the udder then to prepare itself for the coming lactation. So that dry period of about 8 weeks, 60 days is what's recommended. That allows the udder to repair after the last lactation and to get ready for the next lactation.
I suppose at the moment, Tom, the weather is good, grass conditions are holding up. Some farmers out there might be tempted to milk on. What kind of advice would you give in that scenario?
Well, it's early November now. People talking about milking on, if they milk, to the 15th to 20th of November, I don't see any problem with that, because cows calving in late January, early February, if they're dry towards the end of November, they've still got December and January. They've got that 60 days dry period. Okay, so in my mind, it really only becomes an issue if farmers decide to milk on cows that are going to calf in early February, if they're milking them on to the middle of December, right up to Christmas. And then you're shortening the dry cow period, and you're not giving the cow's udder that chance to repair and get ready for the next lactation. More generally then for farmers that are considering milking on, for sure, cows calving in March into April. Yeah, if you want to milk them on over Christmas and into the new year, provided you have adequate feed and quality silage, and you're willing to the extra work involved, you're willing to put in the extra work. I don't see a problem with it. The margins are going to be small because ultimately the extra money you'll bring in for the milk sales, you're going to give back a lot of that in terms of additional feed to keep the cow milking. So the margin is going to be small. If farmers want to do it, fine, but just choose the cows that you're going to do it with, and don't compromise the dry cow period. So
what is best practice then in terms of drying off procedures?
So the drying off procedure itself can really be split down into a couple of segments. So you have before the drying off day or event itself, the drying off event itself, and then afterwards. So they're the three pieces. And really, there's preparation is key to all three, and hygiene is very, very important for the second piece, particularly the actual dry off event itself. So in terms of preparation, what should farmers be doing now? Ideally, but we know it's not the case. But ideally, farmers should have milk recorded their cows during the lactation, and they should have information on individual cows to know which cows have some infection and which cows have not got an infection within their herd. Then they should also, I suppose, be doing a culture, so taking a sample of milk from some number of cows and getting that cultured in a laboratory to find out which bugs are actually causing the mastitis infection. So then they can choose the appropriate antibiotic to treat it at drying off. And also they should, having got those two pieces of information, they should sit down with their veterinary practitioner and talk about what is the best veterinary product to use at drying off. And they also then, I suppose, in terms of preparation, they need to decide whether they're going to use blanket dry cow treatment, in other words, treat all cows with antibiotic at drying off, or whether they're going to use a selective dry cow treatment, in other words, treat a proportion of the herd at drying off with antibiotics, and the other would just get a teat sealer. So there are some of the decisions that have to be thought about in advance. On the day itself, hygiene is highly important, and the other thing I'd mention is help. There's a lot of work goes into this to get it done right, and with larger herd sizes, one farmer taking on to dry off a large number of cows on a morning, there's a lot of work, so help could be needed. Hygiene is also very important.
So on the hygiene side, what are some of the protocols there, Tom?
So what we're recommending is ideally, again, that farmers would clip the cow's tails maybe 2 to 3 weeks in advance of drying off, so that the risk of additional dirt falling onto the teats is reduced. Also, having the milking stand, having that cleaned and hosed down prior to the drying off event. I'd also recommend that you identify your cows for drying off at the morning milking. You draft them out after milked in the morning you've decided to dry them off. And get the milking stand and get all your dry cow tubes and all the other equipment that you need. Get all that ready. And then maybe go and have a cup of tea, because you'll have more energy if you take a little break between milking and drying off. Have your help available. The procedure then itself is extremely important that the teat end is clean. The only way that bacteria can get into the udder is through the teat end. And if the teat end isn't clean, there's a risk that you are going to push dirt up in front of the tube when you're administering the antibiotic into the udder. So piece of cotton wool dipped in methylated spirits and clean the teat end for 10 seconds. And you have a look then at the cotton wool. If it's dirty, you should repeat the process, and it should then be clean on the second go. But that's what we mean by hygiene. It takes cotton wool, methylated spirits, and it takes time.
And what sort of feeding options should farmers consider in the run up to and following drying off, in order to get the best results now next spring?
So. Ideally, what we want to try and do, we want to identify cows that are low, not milking well, so that they're near the end of their lactation anyway. And our guideline figure within Teagasc is cows milking 8 to 10 litres per day. And once they're at that sort of a level of milk yield, they'll dry off more easily than a cow that's milking 12, 13, 14, 15 litres of milk per day. So if you have that kind of information, that's very helpful. Secondly, then you want to try and reduce the plane of nutrition for the milking cow in the run-up to the dry-off event. So if farmers have got cows on grass and maybe they're feeding 3 to 4 or 5 kilos a meal with grass, or if they're indoors and they're getting meal and silage, drop down the meal feeding levels for the couple of days in the run-up to dry-off, and that'll lower the milk production level, and it'll make it easier then for the cow to dry off.
You mentioned earlier about farmers milking more cows at the moment, and obviously that leads to multiples of everything, multiples of teats, multiples of tubes, and we know that the labour issue, particularly on the dairy side, is quite serious at the moment. What are the risks involved with not taking your time, with rushing through the process? Okay, so speaking to some colleagues of mine within Teagasc, they're telling me that they're picking up on individual farmers next spring, when cows start to milk again in the next lactation, that there's a lower than expected cure rate. So cows that were high somatic cell count in this lactation are still high in the next lactation. So the infection hasn't been cured. And also there's a lower than ideal cure rate, and a higher than ideal new infection rate. So there's new infections being picked up. So there's two things happening. The dry cow treatment isn't curing the infections that were there in the lactation just finishing, and also we're seeing that new infections are being picked up. And you'll notice that if you are milk recording and you're looking at your cell check report early next year, you'll see those figures, and you can talk to an advisor or a vet about those if you have concerns. So the risk is that if the job isn't done right, you don't get the results that can be delivered. At the moment, Animal Health Ireland are carrying out a number of cell check events with Teagasc also, and a number of stakeholders. What's turnout been like at the events so far? So Teagasc, AHI, a number of milk processors got together and decided to run a number of events around dry cow management, also to highlight selective dry cow therapy, because it is an issue that's coming at us, I suppose you could say. Attendance has been variable, overall probably a little bit on the low side, and I suppose some of us are scratching our heads and wonder perhaps maybe that farmers feel that they know what needs to be known about dry cow therapy, and perhaps they're right. But I think the new piece on this is the selective dry cow therapy, and how you can implement that across your herd. That's the new piece at these events this autumn. So when you mentioned there about the kind of low turnout and wondering why, is there concern there that there might be a reluctance among farmers who kind of maybe set in their ways on how to do this, that they know how to do it?
Yeah. Well, a colleague of mine says, and I probably fall into the same category, that he has spent the first half of his career as an advisor advising farmers to blanket treat cows at drying off with an antibiotic as a good practice. And that message has been extremely successful in the sense that it's a practice that has been widely adopted. And change, whether it's around this technology or around any other technology involved in farming, change is slow and is difficult. I'm used to doing it this way. It has given me good results. Why would I change? So there's a process of education of farmers around the issues around antimicrobial resistance, and I suppose the role that farmers can play in trying to mitigate or reduce the risk of antimicrobial resistance. And blanket dry cow therapy is, I suppose, is one area that dairy farmers, I think, have to begin to look at. I think over time, we're going to see more farmers moving in that direction.
So, and ultimately then what are the benefits?
Well, ultimately, the benefits of selective dry cow therapy is that there's less antibiotics used. So there's a benefit to the farmer in terms of less cost. There's a benefit to the consumer because less antibiotics used means that there's a reduced risk of antimicrobial resistance developing over time. And there's also a higher quality product because we can put in place practices that will achieve the same end result. Okay, and what's being questioned is the use of antibiotics in a kind of a preventative fashion, kind of just in case. It has been the advice that has been shared with farmers and the practice that has been encouraged, but the thinking around it as a result of research and findings is changing. So, some farmers are already dipping their toes in the water in regards to selective dry cow therapy, and that would be my advice, that farmers consider this and think about it, particularly herds that are already milk recording and have information on individual cows. You do not try selective dry cow therapy without individual cow information. It's just not a runner. For farms that are milk recording, there is the potential to adopt a selective dry cow therapy approach. But I mentioned hygiene earlier in the interview or the discussion, Claire, and while I stress that hygiene is important at drying off, it becomes doubly important when you go with selective dry cow therapy, because for the portion of the cows that you identify to dry off just with a teat sealer, you have no antibiotic to cure an infection that may develop over the dry cow period. So if you don't adequately clean the teat end, there's a risk of pushing infection into the udder, as I already said. And now you're just going to put in a teat sealer to seal the teat, and you have no antibiotic in the udder to cure any infection that develops. So the infection develops and it's there when you start milking next lactation. So hygiene is even more important if you're selectively using selective dry cow therapy.
We'll leave it there, Tom. Thanks very much for joining us.